Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. I'm Michael Hagan from the class of 2015, and I'm joined by producer Chris Judge of the class of 2005. Today we're excited to welcome Father Justin Bolger and Father Peter Gautsch, members of the Hillbilly Thomists, a bluegrass band of Dominican friars. We'll be talking about the band, bluegrass music, and their new album, Living for the Other Side, which recently dropped on the feast of St. Thomas Aquinas. Father Peter, Father Justin, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So my first question, it really is just which one of you was walking around the priory strumming on a banjo one day and eventually, instead of being annoyed, somebody came along and said, we should start a band?
Well, that's more or less how it happened, I guess. I mean, yeah. The kind of origin of the band is a little bit convoluted. I mean, it wasn't anything that we kind of set out to do. It just so happened that there's a bunch of us friars who kind of were all living together at the House of Studies in Washington, D.C., where we do our formation. And a bunch of us happened to be musicians, and we liked to get together and play music. And one or two of the priests in the house had been playing some bluegrass together for a little while, and had called themselves the Hillbilly Thomists after a quote from Flannery O'Connor, a Southern author. And then when us younger guys were kind of getting together and playing music regularly, we kind of eventually got the idea to, record a little bit, and we borrowed the name, and now those two priests are kind of part of the group too. And so it kind of just grew out of the normal rhythms of our life of fraternity and just, enjoying each other's company and playing music together. So,
Father Justin, what were those early sessions like?
There aren't many pros among us. Well, we're amateurs in a good sense. We love what we do. And like Father Peter said, we would just get together a lot and jam, just informally, and also at different celebrations at the House of Studies in DC. Our background, let's see. So Father Peter is a great musician, and you studied piano in college, but you play mandolin in the band and guitar, so you're awesome. My background, I did a lot of music before entering the order as well, and I'm more of a singer-songwriter. I play guitar and keyboards and bass and sing and write, and also have done a lot of recording in the past. So I kind of brought that knowledge, some knowledge of engineering and production. And Father Thomas Joseph White, did he pick up the banjo in the novitiate? Is that right, Father?
I think it was after that. So he played. So Father Thomas Joseph White is really he was one of the first two who were playing music together, sort of playing bluegrass. And he's from the South, from Georgia. And I think he played the mandolin in the novitiate and didn't pick up the banjo until a couple of years ago, which is incredible because he's got some great banjo tracks on this album. He's really,
and then he picked up the resonator guitar for this album too. I mean, and he only started practicing that, I don't know, maybe a month or two before we recorded. So he's
I guess the banjo was a little longer ago, maybe 5 or 6 years or something. But but anyway, so some of us have played some of these instruments for a long time, and then we have a few of us have learned a couple new ones along the way.
So you're all performing, you're doing your own production. It sounds like a really do-it-yourself approach to music, which is really cool. But how far along in the band's origin did you guys realize, wait a second, we could make an album?
Well, one thing we were doing in the House of Studies again in DC was we were recording albums of sacred choral music. So we have a schola, we do chant, just choral pieces, polyphony. We sing a lot at our own masses and liturgies, and we decided to record some albums as fundraisers. And we did I think we did 4 of those, 4 years in a row. And then we said, well, let's switch it up. We've got another thing that we can do. And so we just said, let's record this album of bluegrass and gospel and folk. And the main purpose of it was to be a fundraiser, because the cost of formation for friars at the House of Studies is, it's a lot. It's expensive. So it's a fundraiser. And this new project, this newest album, is the same thing. It's still a fundraiser for all the friars in formation at the House of Studies.
So that's a big pivot from chant and polyphony to bluegrass. Was that a natural switch? Father Peter, were there themes from the sacred music that you would perform that you would pick up on in bluegrass music?
Well, in a way, yeah. I mean, obviously for the albums of sacred music and chant and so on, those were centered around religious themes. You don't have really Gregorian chant about secular themes and topics, So we were very straightforwardly singing those hymns and things about God and about, the spiritual life and just all of these kind of texts that have existed in our Catholic tradition for so long. But in the world of bluegrass, a little bit of folk, but especially in bluegrass, there is this whole strain of like gospel bluegrass music, and so for our first album, we were doing mostly old standards. Father Justin wrote a great song about being a Dominican, which was an original, but the rest were all covers. And they were covers of old kind of gospel bluegrass standards, and so a lot of those kinds of songs are about our yearning for eternity and sort of yearning to be welcomed into heaven, by the angel band, or, what a friend we have in Jesus, that we can cast all our cares on him, It turns out that a lot of bluegrass music was written by deeply religious people. And so some of the similar kinds of themes are present there. It's just expressed in quite a different way, but still very kind of fun and an engaging way, So it's in that sense, it is natural for us as friars to be singing some of these songs because a lot of the themes are things that we are used to thinking and talking about already. And so then for this new album, it's mostly original songs. So Father Justin and Father Thomas Joseph wrote the bulk of the songs on this album. And so we were able to treat some of the same kinds of themes, but from our own experience as preachers and religious, and to kind of put our own take on things.
Yeah, and I think from the music side, especially the singing side of this, moving from choral into bluegrass, there's still a lot of there's a beautiful vocal harmony tradition in bluegrass. And so since we were already used to singing with each other a lot in choral music, some of this translated very nicely into bluegrass, so that we knew, okay, I'm a tenor, Father Peter's a first tenor, Father Timothy's a bass. And so we can kind of, we know where our voices sit well within a given arrangement and with each other. So I think that kind of that knowledge and that practice of singing together, choral music, translated nicely into the bluegrass.
A theme that you mentioned is common in gospel bluegrass music is waiting on eternity. I noticed that in the lyric in track 10, Lead Me by the Hand, the lyric goes, "So won't you lead me by the hand when I'm blind and I can't find a place to stand? All is sin. All I'm doing is sinking more, waiting for you to lead me by the hand." I'm interested in the way that bluegrass, as a genre distinct from traditional sacred music, which tends to focus on God, God's glory, God's omnipotence, well, bluegrass seems to focus on the human experience and human crisis and human sense of waiting. It's a different kind of expression of faith and praise. Father Justin, is there anything to that?
Yeah, one quick edit on the lyrics, all is sand.
Sorry.
Like I'm thinking all is sand. Yeah, I mean, there's sin out there, but there's great. But yeah, I mean, I think there's the part of the context for bluegrass is like the hard scrabble American way of life, pilgrims coming to a new land, like Father Peter said, settling in the hills and hollers of Appalachia. And there's also the influence of African-American music, and a lot of the gospel stuff comes out of songs that developed during slavery, right? Or the call and response, that kind of subgenre of gospel, which found its way into bluegrass. And we have one song like that on the album, Jacob's Ladder. So so I think there is that sense in bluegrass. There's kind of the frontier American experience, which can be I guess, frontier experience can be difficult, but it's all informed by faith. Now, I think this is an ancient kind of Christian theme at the same time, the theme of the pilgrim, and we get it in all the way back in the Old Testament with the Exodus, that the chosen people were led out of slavery into freedom, but they wandered for a long time in the desert. And many, this was an experience often of not knowing where they were going, but that God would be faithful to his promise. So that's an ancient Christian theme, Christian narrative that informs our faith and art, and certainly it informs a lot of bluegrass.
Yeah, and I think that another way to kind of come at that is that we know that in the very, very early church, the earliest days of the church, the Christians, that people referred to the Christian faith as the way, which in one sense can be taken to mean, well, this is the way one should live. This is kind of the mode of life one should follow of faith, But I think it also conveys this idea that, we are on the way, and the faith and the grace that comes to us from Christ is the means by which we come to the end of that journey, the end of the way. We're constantly being led back to that sort of heavenly homeland we were created for. So in that sense, like Father Justin said, that the strength of that theme in bluegrass music is really, it touches on something kind of primal to the Christian life,
So let's go ahead and play a song from the new album. Father Justin, you asked specifically that we play Jericho Blues. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about this song.
So this song is about Zacchaeus, the tax collector from Jericho. And as you may remember from reading the Bible, Zacchaeus was a little guy. So he had to climb up a tree in order to see Jesus, right? And then Jesus calls him to come down, and then he stays in his house. So I thought this was kind of just like a beautiful story, and so I wrote this blues song. And maybe first I came up with the guitar riff, and I wanted to write something in the Delta blues tuning. And so these lyrics came pretty quickly. And of course, Jericho has a lot of import in Scripture as a city of sin. Speaking of the Exodus, the chosen people had to go into the promised land, but they had to take out Jericho, right? And they had to march around the city, and the walls fell down. So that lyric kind of plays into the song as well, that we have walls around our heart, and Jesus can take those down by calling our name. And and he wants to come into our house like he came into Zacchaeus's, as in he wants to live in our soul. And so I liked the theme, and like a lot of blues songs, it's about kind of a struggle. It's a struggle of Zacchaeus, but it's also kind of buoyant. And so I like how the track turned out. There's also a little homage to the Beatles in there regarding the tax man. So.
This is Jericho Blues from the Hillbilly Thomists' new album, Living for the Other Side.
Well, I'm short, my Lord, short in all kinds of ways. Well, I'm short, my Lord, short on stature, short on faith. But I hear you make the difference up. You can make it up all the way. What they say I'm on the take, but I'm just doing my job. What they say I'm on the take, but I'm just doing my job. 'Cause I'm the tax man. Ooh, I'm the tax man. a pretty good view. This is a street down on Main where I can get a pretty good view. See what the talk is all about. Who are you? Well, I heard you call my name like I never heard before. Well, I heard you call my name like I never heard before. So I'm coming down quickly. I wanna hear your voice some more. Well, the walls around this town came down so long ago. Well, the walls around this town came down so long ago. It's just one more wall around my heart. It's time for it to go. Well, I'm short, my lord, short in all kinds of ways. Well, I'm short, my lord, short on stature, short on faith. Well, I hear you make the difference up. You can make it up all the way.
So bluegrass music takes its name from the bluegrass region of Kentucky west of the hills, but its origins are in the mountains themselves. You talked a little bit about the influences that formed bluegrass. Father Peter, could you elaborate a little more on how the genre developed?
Well, in a certain way, I mean, so the you mentioned kind of the hills and hollers earlier, Father Justin, and bluegrass does kind of grow out of the folk music tradition of the Appalachian Mountains. People who kind of lived in the mountains, lived close to the land, worked the land, and had this very kind of like earthbound existence. And their music, the folk music that is originally from that region, kind of reflects that. But it also reflects that many of them were settlers from Ireland and Scotland, kind of a couple generations back before. And so, there are clear influences in a lot of bluegrass music of the kind of Irish folk music tradition too, and so you can hear it in not just the instrumentation, sort of heavy emphasis on the fiddle and other string instruments, but even some of the licks and riffs that are still, you can still hear them in kind of contemporary bluegrass music. I mean, there's a close affinity to that. Which, just as a kind of another little autobiographical note for the band, when we were first getting together to play this music, we were playing Irish tunes after dinner, and it kind of just began to morph, as more brothers would join in and bring their own talents and musical background. And but we ourselves have a little bit of a kind of rooting in Irish music, at least that we would kind of try to play it together as best as we could, But yeah, so the kind of, it started in the hills of the Appalachian region there. But it's bluegrass is named for the bluegrass region of Kentucky. So Kentucky plays a big role in the history of bluegrass music as well. And really the guy who pioneered what became known as kind of modern bluegrass music was Bill Monroe, who was from Kentucky and was a mandolin master and wrote a whole bunch of songs. And he has this very distinctive high-pitched voice when he sings. And he's kind of like a high lonesome, high screamer type voice. And he doesn't really scream. He's more of a kind of, high whisper almost, but he really kind of codified in a certain sense what bluegrass sounds like, and so every bluegrass musician is hugely indebted to him. And, but it's fascinating because there is this whole world of bluegrass music, and a lot of it it's actually relatively modern. I mean, Bill Monroe, you can still hear his original recordings. I mean, he was writing after the advent of recorded music technology, you know, so you can actually go back and listen to the kind of trajectory of the development of bluegrass, you know, and along the way you have people, you know, who added in other kinds of elements of other types of music. There was like this movement in bluegrass where certain jazz elements were infused into it, you know, and so it's a pretty cool thing, because bluegrass all along the way has had this kind of, you know, standard set of themes and a certain kind of sound, folksy kind of sound, but it's also open to these kinds of infusions of other little things. So the fact that we're doing kind of bluegrass, but not exactly bluegrass, I mean, what we're doing does not sound like a Bill Monroe album. Or, you know, the Carter brothers or whatever, Stanley brothers. I mean, it's not, it's quite different than that. But I think it still is kind of in that tradition, because we've infused the kind of folk music with our own kind of Dominican elements, like Father Justin was talking about. We have these certain ways we approach music and sing harmonies and stuff together, and we ourselves have these different musical backgrounds. And so, you know, not like we are on this sort of Mount Rushmore of bluegrass music or anything like that by any means. But what we're doing, I think, is kind of still in that same trajectory of the history of this kind of music, which is pretty exciting.
A theme I noticed in listening to the album, I was struck by a theme that you mentioned before of waiting, but this problem, or another theme that's presented is this problem that's not unsimilar to the one presented in the opening of the book of Ecclesiastes, that all things are fleeting, that all is vanity, that the eye is not satisfied with seeing or the ear with hearing, that we all fade into the anonymity of history. And it meets this quandary with the message of the gospel. Bluegrass is rich with songs about hardship and often poverty. Tell us about the voices in these songs. What are their struggles?
Well, there is this one tune, Weight of Eternal Glory. So I mean, the title says a lot right there, the weight of eternal glory, WEIGHT, right? And so there are a few characters in this story, and the one who wrote it, Father Thomas Joseph White, he described it as each passing the baton of hope to each other, that they're, you know, we all suffer in this life, okay? But something that faith gives you is a bigger view. You can see beyond. You can see into the next life. You know, it's not, you know, faith is not anti-rational. We say it's, you know, beyond. It's supernatural, okay? And so faith helps you see into the next life, and that the suffering of this life is not all there is, right? So life is not a tragedy. There are tragic things that happen, yet God leads us by the hand. And we can pass that baton of hope on to each other as well. So yeah, I think I like some of these tunes because they're honest about the tragic in life. They're honest about it, that does happen, and that's a feature of human existence. Yet there is always this sense of this baton of hope being passed, and hopefully that's what we're doing a little bit as well.
I love the lyric in Chasing Money No More. Everything eventually turns to dust. All your possessions eventually rust. The things of the spirit are the only things to trust. Who's on the piano in that track? He really carries the beat with the drums.
Oh, that was me. Thanks.
Excellent. It was really it was a great tune. Like many bluegrass songs, it places emphasis on the downbeat. What are some other musical characteristics of bluegrass that make it different from, say, folk or mainstream country music?
Well, in a way, I suppose you could say it's kind of it's a branch of folk. Mainstream country music, at least today, it seems to have kind of increasingly kind of like rock pop influences, you know, so you have a lot more like electric instruments, and that's kind of it's almost a non-starter for bluegrass, you know. I mean, we don't really see electric instruments in bluegrass at all. So one thing is just the instrumentation, but you know, a lot of people think of bluegrass as just kind of like lightning fast, you know, picking on guitars and, you know, kind of like screaming on fiddles and stuff, and there's a lot of fast bluegrass, but That's not the only thing there is in bluegrass. There's also slower kind of almost ballads, or some kind of mostly a cappella type stuff, with beautiful harmonies. And, so as far as kind of musical characteristics, I would say that instrumentation is a lot of acoustic instruments, guitar, upright bass, banjo, mandolin, fiddle, that kind of stuff. The kind of style of playing has developed over time, and different people have their own takes on it. But yeah, like you said, there's a kind of emphasis on the downbeat. You can really find the beat easily in a bluegrass song, so your kind of typical is, kind of like a boom chick kind of rhythm, and that can be, like I said, faster, a little slower. Sometimes there might be like a little bluegrass waltz going on, those are usually the slower kind of more straightforwardly spiritual kinds of songs, but I don't know, Father Justin, if you would add anything to that.
Well, that particular song, I remember, Father Thomas Joseph wrote that, and I was just kind of hearing that kind of piano, which I think you would call boogie woogie. That was a genre that it would refer to a kind of piano, especially with the what you're doing with the left and the right hand, that sort of combination with the walking bass line, and then what you're doing with the right hand. So, but that's just kind of what I heard. But I think that goes back to another point you made, Father Peter, that we, personally, we friars bring our own influences and musical backgrounds into this a basic kind of bluegrass setting, and so that it changes it, and so that particular song, it's fast, but that one might be even a little bit more on the old school, almost like rock and roll feel, with some bluegrass instrumentation, but we added a little cowbell in there too, and we had some fun with the vocals. So at one point I was doing this sort of bass vocal in the chorus, and Father Thomas Joseph was thinking I was trying to bring a little Devo, the 80s band into the track, which wasn't my idea.
If you listen close, you can hear it too. It's subtle. It's just subtle enough. But yeah, that song is, like Father Justin said, it's a cool example of kind of how we're doing an album which we're kind of calling a bluegrass album, but it's not straightforwardly bluegrass through and through. That song, you would be hard pressed to really call it a bluegrass song. It is more this kind of like bluegrass infused boogie woogie type deal. It's just kind of unique and very fun. I think that was a really fun one to record.
Let's listen for some of these characteristic elements as well as deviations from them in another track. This is Bourbon, Bluegrass, and the Bible from the album Living for the Other Side.
Lived through time, passed through fire, broke my heart, wounded desire, changed my life, fixed the past, stared at death and it stared back, standing fast in the light of the word. A shotgun blast was the last thing I heard. I rattled in the wind like a window pane. My soul's alright, but my body complains. Death's in the world and it's gone viral. Everybody's talking about a new revival. When it's a question of love and survival, bourbon, bluegrass, and the Bible. Sleep like a giant, watch the rain, bust to your force and feel no pain. There's music at night, music in the day. You live your life without getting paid. You're a child of the storm, a child of the Lord. You live your life without getting bored. You lose your mind, but you find it again. And talking about grace and talking about sin. Death's in the world and it's gone viral. Everybody's talking about a new revival. But when it's a question of love and survival, bourbon, bluegrass, and the Bible. Preacher don't lie, whiskey in the still, a fox in the rain done had his fill. Chicken in the bread pan, picking out dough, play that song wherever I go. People on the left, people on the right, they don't need beer to get into a fight. Everybody's out in their disguise, the light in the morning just hurts my eyes. Yes, in the world and it's gone viral, everybody's talking about a new revival. But when it's a question of love and survival, bourbon, bluegrass, and the Bible. Pretty good. Sit up straight and clean your face. We done gotta get out of this place. Uncle Ben is loading his gun. You start to walk, I'll start to run. Lifting my thumb by the side of the road. I take my banjo wherever I go. Death's in the world and it's gone viral. Everybody's talking about a new revival. But when it's a question of love and survival, bourbon, bluegrass, and the Bible. Baptized at 105, not a life well lived, but a life well died. At the funeral we all sang Mama Tried. Half of us laughed and half of us cried. Redneck town, 2 dogs in a sack. You burn it all down and it all grows back. Stars in the night, their light don't lie. I'll see you up there when they fall from the sky. Death's in the world and it's gone viral. Everybody's talking about a new revival. But when it's a question of love and survival, bourbon, bluegrass, and the Bible.
I like the way this song presents bourbon, bluegrass, and the Bible, almost as like a 3-legged stool holding the narrator up. It's a simple old-time religion, maybe not the most nuanced, maybe not dripping with Thomistic thought, but there's something very real and I would say distinctly American about it. But interestingly, the song isn't bourbon, bluegrass, the Bible, and the sacraments, which I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the Appalachian Catholic heritage and what its origins are.
Yeah, so regarding the last part of your question, I don't think there's much in the way of Catholic influence in Appalachia because the Scotch-Irish who came were Presbyterian, right? So those were the Ulster, the Irish were the Ulster Irish who were Presbyterian at that point. So they came and settled. Now, interestingly, we Dominicans, okay, so our founder, the founder of this province in the early 1800s, Father Fenwick, he studied in Europe and he came back and he wanted to found the province here. And the Archbishop of Baltimore at the time, Carroll, had written to him and said, yeah, why don't you start a school in Maryland, a college? And we Dominicans are devoted to study and preaching. So Fenwick said, yeah, that's great. Let's do that. So he shows up with a couple friars from England and the Archbishop said, oh man, we've built this little school called Georgetown in the meantime. But a lot of Southern Maryland Catholics are heading through the Cumberland Gap, right, over the Blue Ridge Mountains and settling into Kentucky. So why? And there's only like one French priest out there, and he's a Jansenist. So why don't you guys go out and take care of those Catholics? And that's where Fenwick was from originally, Southern Maryland, right? An old kind of Catholic landed gentry family, British origin. So that's where we went first. So we've actually been in Kentucky since the early 1800s, our province. And so we served the settlers out there, and started a school there as well. And some of our first parishes then were in Kentucky and Ohio, which was the frontier at the time. So that's actually part of our contribution to Catholic Appalachia, although we were probably a little bit outside of that, a little west of that in Kentucky.
So I noticed the lyric in Heaven or Tennessee, going to trade my revolution for revelation, trade my electric guitar for wise blood, trade my Yankee Taylor for a Southern trailer, trade my rolling dice of fate for the God of love. Now, being Dominican friars, I know that you just had to get that Flannery O'Connor reference in there. And this is an album, not a Civ lecture, but I am wondering, are there any other references that PC students and alumni who have been through Civ and through other courses should be on the lookout for?
Well, yeah, the wise blood reference is certainly the most explicit. That, of course, is the name of Flannery O'Connor's first novel that she wrote of the two novels. She's mostly known for her short stories. But she also has a lot of letters in these two novels, and Wise Blood is the name of the first one she wrote. So that's the most explicit reference. Although, as I mentioned earlier, the name of our group, the Hillbilly Thomists, comes from a quote from Flannery O'Connor from one of her letters, where she says that everyone who's read this novel, Wise Blood, thinks that she's a hillbilly nihilist, but actually she's a hillbilly Thomist. So it's not too surprising to see that we have some kind of references, either subtle or not subtle, to Flannery O'Connor. I think certainly some of the characters that show up in some of the songs, so Father Justin was talking earlier about Weight of Eternal Glory. You have these kind of bizarre circumstances. You've got like this meeting of two people in a saloon, basically, and one of them very unexpectedly says, "Well, listen, Buster, I'm suffering under the weight of eternal glory." And you're like, whoa, where did that come from? It's almost, you have these characters who say and do unexpected things, or, you have this kind of gritty approach to just the stark reality of suffering in life, which was kind of Flannery O'Connor's bread and butter, because she was able to sort of infuse what appears to be very kind of dark and what some people called grotesque, although she didn't like that term. But she was able to sort of infuse that kind of situation with the reality of grace, and to see how grace is present even in the midst of very kind of violent and difficult sort of circumstances. And so I think at the very least that ethos is in the background of a lot of these kinds of songs. You mentioned Bourbon bluegrass in the Bible. Death's in the world and it's gone viral. That of course is a kind of veiled reference to the coronavirus pandemic. But it's a way of presenting that as an opportunity for grace. Everybody's talking about a new revival, and so to sort of cling to the faith and to the grace that comes from Christ, to be able to find our way through these kind of circumstances of suffering and difficulty. So the whole album in a certain way is it draws from that kind of approach of Flannery O'Connor. I don't know, Father Justin, maybe you've got some other ideas.
Well, there is a little reference to the German philosopher Martin Heidegger. And so that may be the first time that's happened in bluegrass. And that's like one of our most straightforward bluegrass songs on the album, You Will Still Walk Down the Line. So it's like, what you might be thinking about government or thinking about being in time. So Being in Time is a famous work by Martin Heidegger. So I don't know if that's read in Civ, possibly, maybe referenced.
Excerpts. I don't know if has anybody ever actually made it through the whole thing?
Good question. I haven't. But Father Thomas Joseph probably has. But
it's said that in one of Flannery O'Connor's short stories, there's a character who is a kind of very highfalutin, thinks very highly of herself, sort of philosophy PhD. And at one point she's reading a book, and I don't think it's in the short story itself, maybe in another essay. The book is proposed to be Being in Time by Heidegger. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, so Father Thomas Joseph made sure to stick that in there as not just a Heidegger reference, but a Flannery O'Connor reference.
2 for 1. I like it. So I've got to ask, what's next for the band? I see that you've secured a deal with the coveted Dominicana record label. Any plans to play St. Peter's Square in the near future?
Oh, if only. Yeah, I don't know. We certainly like to play music together as much as we can. We're all kind of spread out to the four winds right now of different assignments. So Father Justin and I are here. There's a couple of friars in like Washington, D.C. We've got guys in Philadelphia, New York, Rome. So we are kind of all spread out. So it's difficult for everyone to get together at the same time. We were very blessed to be able to do that in August to record this thing. But smaller groups of us, try to find places and times to play together. And hopefully on campus even, we might be able to do some things this semester. And, occasionally different requests for things come in. So we sort of take them as they come. But your lips to God's ears.
Next year's spring concert, maybe? Well, the last song that we're going to play is, it's named for the words in the 4th chapter of John's Gospel. This is Give Me a Drink from the album Living for the Other Side.
I've been coming here for years, looking for water. Heavy I've held this burning thirst. It's a yoke hard to bear, of my own making, and I need you to undo. I'm begging you, give me a drink. I am thirsty. I have drawn this well bone dry with this old rope and every bucket of mine. Would you put in your well? I could draw from all my life. How constant you are, sweetly you've spoken, poured your word forth upon this land, turning desert into pools, dry land to water. Would you do it unto me? Oh, pretty please, give me a drink. I am thirsty. I have drawn this well bone dry with this old rope and every bucket of mine. Would you put in me a well? I could draw from all my life.
Father Justin, Father Peter, thank you so much for joining us today, and best wishes to you both and to the band.
Thanks very much, Michael.
Thanks for having us.
If you'd like to buy or listen to Living for the Other Side, follow the link in the show notes to the Hillbilly Thomists website. Subscribe to the Providence College Podcast in all the usual places, including iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify, as well as your smart speaker. If you like what you hear, please review and share with others. Thanks for listening, and go Friars.
If a river's gonna run, it's gotta come from somewhere. But these headwaters have eluded me. So would you come?